I want to welcome Alex Sardar, who is the Chief of Party of Counterpart International Armenia. This is the first edition of 20 Questions with the ARF Shant Student Association. Thank you very much for taking the time out while you're here, Alex. We'll jump right into things. We have 20 questions for you. Just to start off with, what's the mission of Counterpart International, and what's the mission of Counterpart International Armenia?
Okay. Counterpart International is an organization with almost a half a century of history, working in developing countries to help communities, empowering communities to find solutions to their own challenges. That's the general mission, and in Armenia we've been doing civil society strengthening and humanitarian assistance for over a decade. In the last, better part of the last decade, we've been focusing on empowering communities to find their own solutions. So less about humanitarian work and more about development work.
Actual development work. Tell us a little bit about the path that led you, having grown up actually from Iran, having grown up in the West Coast, the path that led you to work with Counterpart.
I studied international relations as a graduate student, and I had sort of thought about living in Armenia and working in Armenia, but I wasn't going to move to Armenia at any cost. So I was lucky enough to be offered a job on a U.S. government-funded project working with the parliament with another organization, and moved to Armenia in 2002. Then 2.5 years later, the job at Counterpart opened up in Armenia. I applied, I got it. And in a couple of months, I'll be celebrating my first decade in Armenia.
10 years in Armenia. What has that been like?
Change.
You've seen a lot since 2002.
Yeah.
Saying 2002 to 2012 doesn't seem like that much because I kind of remember 2002, but that's light years in
Right.
Armenia.
Exactly. I'll tell you, for me, change is measured in volume and not in small pieces. And I can tell you this volume is huge. I mean, we are sometimes our own harshest critics, which is good because it keeps us on our toes. But we also have to stop and appreciate all the change that we've been able to achieve. Now, does that mean there isn't more to be done? Absolutely. There's so much more, exponentially more to be done. But change is happening in Armenia.
Okay, so what are some of your responsibilities with Counterpart? Take us through a day in the life of Alex Sardar.
I'm the country director for Counterpart in Armenia, and our team numbers about 42 people. We work in every Mars in Armenia, in more than about 60 villages and cities. And we do anything that you can imagine a development organization doing. A day in my life is waking up at about 5:30 a.m. and waiting for light to come out because I have the perfect view of Arat from my bedroom, and then getting my day started in the homeland. Every morning I wake up in Armenia, I'm appreciative of the opportunity that so many others before me didn't have. But that's the abstract. That's the
personal side.
That's the personal side. The practical sort of day-to-day side of it is I feel that every single thing that I do in Armenia has a positive or even sometimes a negative impact, but it has an impact. It reaches a goal. It affects someone's life, and I like that. I like that I can point to specific changes that my work affects.
So, can you tell us about some of the organizations that CI works with, and a couple of specific examples of projects that Counterpart funds?
Sure. We work with we have worked with more than 400 nonprofit organizations in Armenia, and now we've expanded into community. So we're adding to our portfolio. But some of the better known national organizations that we've worked with are organizations like Transparency International that does amazing work in fighting corruption in Armenia. We've worked with the Protection of Consumer Rights Union, or NGO, in Armenia, which is the largest consumer education awareness and rights organization. We've worked with small business networks to help small businesses get registered and protect their rights. So we run the gamut. Our portfolio runs the gamut. Yeah, wide range. But we also work with small community groups. I'll give you an example. In Goris, one of my favorites, favorite organizations to have funded and worked with, we funded a small group called the Goris English Teachers Association. They have one, and they ran an election project to encourage stay-at-home moms to get out the vote on election day last time around. And they did such a marvelous job. We've been working with them ever since then. So those little gems,
a lot of novel concepts.
Absolutely. And you know, I'll tell you, Vaché, things that we take for granted in other contexts, like the United States, we see and we sometimes don't value them as much. But when we see them in action, they're really interesting.
Okay, one of the biggest buzzwords recently is this concept of civil society. Sometimes it's talked about without even understanding what it is. Can you tell us a little bit about the concept, and also about the state of civil society, also NGOs in Armenia, sure. Both positive and negative?
Sure. I think the way I like to define civil society is anything well, the space between the family and the state. Anything that occurs, any transaction that occurs between those two, the most basic form of organization in society and the most complex form is civil society. That includes small business, large business, media, right? Now, for most people, civil society has been used in redux to refer to NGOs, right. Nonprofits, which is fine. That's fine. In Armenia, the state of civil society, as we like to call it technically, is in consolidation, which means it is going towards a more efficient and a more regrouped form of operation. And our challenges, civil society's challenges in Armenia, I can boil it down to one: better grounding and rooting of their missions in communities that they serve. Nonprofit organizations. Okay. They need to reach out to communities in Armenia that they represent in political circles, in government agencies, and they need to be able to take the messages of regular citizens who don't have access to government back to government. Yeah. That's what nonprofits are.
Some would say that that's what the purpose of having non-governmental organizations is to represent.
In
the
my
voice
mind,
of the
that's
people
exactly it. Absolutely.
Okay, so what have been some of the responses from the government officials to the work that you do, to USAID funded project? So that gets you a little bit of elbow room, but what have been some government reactions to the work?
In general, I have to say, we believe in partnering with government to reach results, but in any context, anywhere, the only reason a civil society or a nonprofit sector exists or development occurs is because it is supposed to serve as a counterbalance to the state apparatus. So there's, it's very natural that there would be tension and there would be sort of a push and pull relationship between the two sectors.
Which should happen.
Which should happen. It's part of a democratic society. I think one of the best examples that I can point to was a government-sponsored lobbying law and then a set of amendments to the Armenian NGO law that
I remember that. Right,
and that we found to be not in good faith. Let's put it mildly. We organized we helped Armenia's NGO sector organize and really bring out their best arguments and fact-based evidence to the government, and eventually both bills died in Parliament. So that I would say is one of the best examples. There's always going to be some
in general,
ruffled feathers.
They're ready to work with you?
I think Armenia's government is ready.
Or whether is it a sort of whether they like it or not?
No, it's not. It's not a matter of liking it or not. It's a matter of political will, and it's a matter of capacity, knowing how to do it. I find that when you sit down with people and with government officials and talk to them at their own level with value added to their process, more often they're willing to at least listen. Okay. Now, I would be naive to say that the political will is always there, but that's true in any country.
We recognize the importance of empowered citizenry, involvement in local government. strengthening the idea of community. How do you see the idea of community and also interaction with individuals with their local government?
This is probably the biggest challenge that I have with living in Armenia, and I think Armenia will have over the next few decades in reforming itself. When you move from a small agrarian country, agrarian economy, to I can't call it an industrialized economy, but one that relies on a diversified set of industries, you lose that sense of community at the village level. Now, when you lose that, what you replace it with are families. So in Armenia, community is a family. It's not a community. A neighborhood is not a community. And that's the biggest challenge in Armenia's development. Because
is it not a community because they're not representing what their interests are, or because they're not having that dialogue, or they're not engaged?
They're not engaged. They don't view the interests of... I don't view my neighbor's interests as intersecting with mine. I see our interests as opposing each other, and so that's the real challenge in Armenia. Now, we could go into a philosophical discussion about this, but I think if we can break through with the concept of community in Armenia, and I'm seeing this happen with young people a lot, where they're associating with one another over common interests without necessarily having known each other from before. We will see this concept of community, larger collectives, larger interest groups occurring. But right now, everyone is for him or herself, and that bothers me sometimes in Armenia.
Personally, I've had experience working with the AYF's Youth Corps program, organizing volunteer groups of diasporans to actually try to build bridges with Hayastan. And we've realized there's a serious lack of volunteer culture. Yeah. It's almost something that's unknown or even amusing at times, as if the concept of doing something for nothing or doing something for the country itself doesn't exist. Right. Cause and solution.
Cause, it's this bad thing called the Soviet Union. Volunteerism in the Soviet Union was mandatory. There used to be these, they still use this word, subotniks, where on certain designated Saturdays, everyone was supposed to volunteer and clean their courtyards and things like this. So people associate very negative things with volunteerism. Now, that's the easy excuse, I would say. The other one is that there is a culture of entitlement in Armenia, as there is in many other post-Soviet countries, where people expect government or others to do for them. Exactly. Right. My most classic story is when it snows in Yerevan, where I live. I get a shovel and I shovel the front entrance of my building, and every neighbor will come up to me and say, "Why do you do it? The government is supposed to do it." And my response is, nowhere in the world does government ever shovel in front of your building. You have to do it. So it comes back to that sense of community. If I can help ease things for you, perhaps one day you will help ease things for me, and guess what? We create a community there.
That's definitely something that's got to time hopefully will solve.
Let me I don't want to be all negative about it. I think the solution to it is consistently driving home in Armenia the concept of community, the concept of
like civic pride.
Civic pride, national pride.
Yeah,
those are important concepts that we take for granted, but those are things that are needed. And by the way, young people. That's where you start.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so you talked a little bit about what the government's reaction to some of the work that Counterpart has done. How about the government's reaction to having diasporans live in Armenia?
I don't think there is a government reaction or policy towards diasporans living in Armenia. I think there's a lot of lip service paid to the concept of diasporans coming home. I'm not going to mention any specific programs, but there's you did. but I don't think Armenia's government has seriously sat down and said, how are we going to do this? Examples abound. Ireland, Israel, of African countries, but Armenia's government has yet to formulate a specific and effective policy on that.
To a certain degree, actually, we've seen failures from the diaspora ministry, but to a certain degree, we own some of that failure as well as a community.
Sure, absolutely.
So that's the government's attitude towards diasporans. What about the community, your neighbors, even the people that you shop in the grocery store with? 10 years is a long time, but I'm still, I don't want to speak for you, but I think that do you see yourself ingrained, or do you see yourself looked at differently?
No, I see myself looked at differently, but I don't intend to be different. I just am, because of my practices, customs, what have you. I'm in Armenia, I'm much more an American than I'm
Right.
an Armenian. But that's secondary. I think in general, any Armenian citizen, native Armenian I've come across who has asked me about my story, and I've been able to share some of it with them. It's been nothing but positive responses. And I'm not the only one. There are so many other people like me who live in Armenia who didn't have any reason to be in Armenia. And by the way, we think of ourselves as the lucky ones because we have really good lives there. But we see people's responses and their appreciation for sort of coming in, why not? Let's give it a try.
Yeah,
let's give it a try.
It's sort of shifting the perception from, oh my God, you're a martyr moving to the homeland for this romantic idea, to, hey, I'm living my life and I'm being positive in the community.
Vaché, I'll share this with you and the camera. That moving to Armenia did wonders for my career, for my personal life, for my quality of life, for every aspect of my life. Moving to Armenia was the best thing I could have done. So if anyone thinks that I sacrificed something for moving to Armenia, they're completely mistaken.
That's an important message to get across.
I mean,
Okay, so back to serious topic. What are your thoughts about the crisis? We'll call it a crisis of emigration, out-migration in Armenia. How do we stem the tide? Significance of the year 2058.
It is the most urgent, if not, I'm having a hard time finding the word, urgent and potentially disastrous challenge that Armenia faces today. Because today's emigres out of Armenia are not economic immigrants anymore. They are not political immigrants anymore. They are volunteer immigrants. They're emigres. The reason they're leaving their country is because they do not see a bright future for their kids, for their families, for themselves, in a country where rule of law exists, where fairness exists. And so when you are already talking about people who make really good living, a very good living in Armenia, consciously decide and voluntarily pursue a process of leaving that country, I would venture to guess that that's when the country's in trouble.
You're talking about serious problems.
Serious problems. And the significance of 2058 we talked about before. We've run some statistical regressions based on population growth rates in Armenia. And by 2058, if things go the way they are going, there will be one person left in Armenia. That's a serious, that's a scary thought for me, honestly. And neighboring countries are having population growth rates. Turkey, Anatolia is having plus 23%. Azerbaijan is 37% population growth. So these are large population growth rates. Now, I want everyone to envision Armenia, Turkey, Azerbaijan, right? And one person in Armenia and millions of other people around it.
2058 it's in our lifetime.
Yeah,
this generation's lifetime, and that's sort of it goes back to as completely sad as it is to say, it goes back to Talat Pasha's Single Armenian in the Museum.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest with you, Vaché, and we've talked about this before, but I see this the challenge and the I use the word challenge a lot, but the call to action of our generation, a strong Armenian state. If we fail at this, we failed generations before, we failed those who gave their lives in the genocide, and many others before then. I really do see this as the call to action for us.
You spoke earlier about the disintegration of the societal fabric. How does that play into the issue of immigration and also into the other societal issues?
Sure. This integration of the social fabric of Armenia, I talk about it not only from I lament about it. I think it's difficult that it's happening, but my point is that we need to face up to these issues in order to find solutions to them. For example, the economic crisis of the last 2 decades, first the energy blockade, then the boom, which still didn't have really much of an effect on anywhere outside of Yerevan. And then the last few years, which have been terrible in terms of the financial crisis that has reached Armenia. It's tearing families apart. It's tearing communities apart. People are starting to live different lives, which is affecting what we Armenians are very proud of our family values, our love for our children, our homes, and so on and so forth. But behind that sort of facade or idealistic set of concerns are things like HIV/AIDS rates. Okay, and I'll just give you one example of this. The highest rate of HIV/AIDS, growing HIV/AIDS patients in Armenia are married women. Okay, married women who live within a kilometer of the south-north highway where Iranian truckers frequent. I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to figure out why that's happening, right? So we need to come up with solutions, but before we come up with solutions, we need to seriously start talking about these issues. Domestic violence, anything, and not just the negative ones. We need to talk about the impact of the internet and information technology in Armenia. It's having an impact. It's having an impact on language, on culture. These are not things that we can stop, but we can certainly innovate and make it fit our own needs as a country.
Okay, I want to ask you about a series of realities on the ground.
Sure.
As brief as you want to be. Women in society, business, politics, leadership.
I see women more and more grabbing, pulling, fighting for power in Armenia. I will also say this: Armenia's progress, development in the last 2 decades have been built on the backs of women. And
54%.
Yes, and Armenia's women are going to lead that country into the future. So if anyone has any doubt about the role of women in Armenia, come talk to me.
Okay. Youth in movement building, in politics.
Young people in Armenia particularly are, well, not just Armenia, but in this context in Armenia, are wary of organizations, are wary of organized activity, and they're far more individualistic. And lucky for them, with current communication technology and social networking and so on, it's very easy for one person to be an entire PR company or organization onto themselves. So young people are taking things very seriously and taking it into their own hands, and they're running and starting and running and succeeding at social movements that just 5 years ago would have been impossible. I've mentioned in conversations Mariam Sukhudian, Sarhat Petrosyan, really good people with good intentions who are getting things done. And my only hope is that they're going to continue doing this beyond the sort of contained way that they're doing it.
And hopefully that their actions are contagious.
Absolutely.
Political parties in Armenia.
I think that the biggest challenge with political parties in Armenia is that I'm a political junkie, and I don't see a clear delineation of ideology in Armenia. If I believe in a political party's policies, I'd like to see a basis for those policies. With that said, I think there's a lot of opportunity for political parties to do great work if they only actually got out of their parliament offices and their political party offices and got into villages and cities around the country and talked to people. I think political parties are always going to exist, but in my mind, they're a dying breed. in Armenia particularly. I don't know if they were ever a living breed, but they're a dying breed because they do not connect with the regular Joe Schmo Armenian.
So those parties, in order to be viable, they need to start connecting with the people, and they need to start representing what their ideals are.
Yes. And they need to respond to people.
One of the biggest problems that I've seen with political parties is a lot are built around individuals rather than the ideas.
Cult of personality. Absolutely, yeah. And then that's a huge problem because that is not an institution. That's populism.
Yeah.
So.
In the ARF Shant Student Association and the ARF in general, we talk about this concept of tebiyerir. We see that as something that's both a mental and a physical, hopefully, presence in Armenia. A mental connection to Armenia, taking skill sets, talents, knowledge, and applying them to the homeland. From your experiences, is this a feasible goal for young people to have, to actually take their knowledge from whatever diasporan background they have, whatever college, university background they have, whatever career background they have, and take those and actually apply them successfully in Armenia?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. First of all, you mentioned something that's so important to me, and if you could only do that, you would have done major things for the Armenian nation. Psychological repatriation, mental repatriation is of utmost importance. We are so ingrained in the way we've done business in our communities and the way we've grown up and we've built our communities that it's almost difficult for us to sort of shift a little bit and think about, oh, wait a minute, there's a country out there that's going to be the sustaining anchor for our identity and for diasporan communities for centuries to come. And if that state does not exist, diasporan communities don't stand much of a chance anymore.
I mean, we're sort of the we're the independence generation.
Absolutely. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. So that's very important. And I'll say this one sentence as well. Any young Armenian, formerly young Armenian, who wants to come to Armenia, mentally young Armenian, who wants to come to Armenia, make a contribution, make some money, because I know we all need money to live. Opportunities are aplenty. So, but you need to come and you need to give it a try before you give up. Don't give up before trying.
Absolutely. Okay, so you mentioned this earlier. I caught on to it. Explain to me, to us, the difference between a repatriate and a diasporan living in Armenia.
You know, I struggle with this because when I moved to Armenia, and to this day, I don't find myself. I never say that I've moved to Armenia forever. There is no forever in today's world. So right now I live in Armenia. I hope to live for many more years in Armenia. But I also know that economic realities may move me somewhere else, jobs and so on. I think a repatriate, by definition, has to be someone who is returning somewhere. But in our reality, because most of us were from Western Armenia, our families were from Western Armenia, and that concept of Armenia is very much interconnected with today's Republic of Armenia and Western Armenia. We call, some people call themselves repatriates because they look at their move to Armenia as more permanent and as more symbolic. Very few, I'll tell you this, very few people, diasporan friends at least, who live in Armenia, call themselves diasporans living in Armenia. They just call themselves Armenians at this point. It's a very tenuous and difficult position to put yourself in because you then are asking others to make the distinction that you're a little different because you're a diasporan. Armenian.
Perfect. Simple. It's the simplest answer, and it's also the perfect one. Okay, last question. We got to around 20. Your message to college students, to university students, to young professionals, to youth. Simple as that.
I'll tell you, I said this earlier today. I've been waiting for this kind of an opportunity to talk to people who I think would be willing to listen to some of the ramblings that I have to share with them. My only message to young people, today's young people, is this. Every time I walk into Independent Armenia's parliament, every time I walk into a local government office, every time I talk to a young person, an old person, every time I walk on the streets of Yerevan, the only thing I have to do to remind myself of the significance of that fact of me living in Armenia is my grandmother, okay? My grandmother's generation was the generation that prayed, wished, and hoped for independence. Lucky for her, she saw it. She came to see independent Armenia. But the responsibility that she left me with, that I feel, is that a strong Armenia must exist. If I failed at that, I failed my grandmother. So that's my personal side. The message to young people is Armenia today is not a charity case anymore. It is a great land of opportunity where you can succeed, learn, give, take. And the best thing that you can do, the best contribution, the most important contribution that you can make in Armenia is your person, is your talents, it's your skills, it's your time. If you're willing to do any of that, go on counterpart.am, send me an email, and I'll make sure that you're able to do it.
Excellent, excellent. You know, our grandparents and our great-grandparents' generation, that was the victimized generation. The generations in between were the liberation generation, and the diaspora generation. We're the independence generation.
I agree.
And that's something that we should run with. Alex Sardar, thank you very much for taking the time out. 20 questions. For everyone out there, the ARF Shant Student Association works on university campuses with Armenian university students, college students, graduate students, working to further these ideas, political engagement with the homeland, the concept of Tebi Yergir. Visit us at facebook.com/ARF1890. We have a Twitter account, ARF Shant. If anybody wants to be involved, please get in touch with us. Alex, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much.